Look, I'm going to keep it as casual as we do it on the other end with the
Yeah,
space
of
as well.
course.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're not going to be more professional, are we?
It's unlikely. I think we are.
There you go. It's
Yeah,
live.
we're live.
It is
All
live.
right, we're live.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so here we are. Um,
Excellent.
so, welcome everybody. I know there's probably literally nobody so far, but that's okay. Um, I think as we get started with this, it's probably worth just talking a little bit about what we're doing, why we're doing it. So, to give anyone who is either watching this for the first time or listening to it for the first time a bit of a recap, for the last 3.5 to 4 months, we've been doing a series of bi-weekly Twitter spaces where we've been jumping on an audio Twitter space and talking about Swift packages, basically. So we talk about what's going on with the package index project. We talk, sometimes we have a kind of trivia quiz based on package information. Sven has been quizzing me, but actually today I have a quiz for Sven. So it's the tables are turned today.
Oh, God, it's a stressful episode, this one.
It's not as big a quiz as you normally do for me. And then the other thing that we always do is we always recommend some packages from the community. So we talk about some packages that we've seen coming into the package index for the last over the last 2 weeks, because we do this every couple of weeks. So that's what we've been doing so far, and we had a conversation just earlier this week. Actually, it's all come together fairly quickly, about whether we wanted to make it a little bit more serious. So we've had some feedback after our Twitter Spaces that people would like to listen to this as a podcast. Um, and we agreed with that because it's the kind of thing that obviously a live discussion is very time dependent, and a lot of people are working at this time or they're busy or whatever. And yes, you can look back at the Twitter Spaces and play back a replay, but it's not as convenient as listening to it in whatever your podcast client of choice is. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to do. But we also didn't want to lose the live, to give Twitter some credit, which is not getting a lot of credit in the last week or so, but to give Twitter some credit, um, I actually really like what they did in terms of the concept of Twitter Spaces. I think being able to jump on and immediately get a live audience of people to listen to some words that you're saying is actually quite a cool idea, and I think the UI could use with a little bit of work. But I thought actually the concept was pretty solid, and we didn't want to lose that live broadcast element of it. So we found a podcasting platform that allows us to live stream it and also put it out as a podcast, and so that's what it is. I don't know whether
Yeah,
you've got anything
I'd
to
be
add to that.
well, just maybe to understand whether the live aspect was actually interesting to people. And we did have a fair few people who dialed in. I guess because it was easy to do on Twitter, and I'm curious if we'd lose these people if they're still interested in that, or if, which might also be possible, if it's actually more interesting for us, as the presenters of seeing that aspect of it. It might actually be that it's sort of more helpful for us to have a. I mean, the audience is virtual either way, but it's sort of like visually a bit less virtual, if that makes sense. If you see these little avatars in the Twitter client, you feel like you're talking to people a bit more that way. Um, but it might in the end just be something that's really more for the presenters that of interest than it is for the audience, and that would be interesting to hear if there's actually how this will turn out, this little experiment.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that so far we have one viewer, but that viewer has stayed with us for the entirety of the stream so far. So whoever you are, thank you very much for listening.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, that one
Oh, is it
viewer
you,
is
Sven?
me.
Is it you? Oh, That's devastating.
But yes, hi to you, Dave.
That's literally devastating. What do they say? They say like dance like nobody's watching, this podcast like nobody's listening, right?
A great start, that's for sure. Are you still there?
Am I not coming through?
Oops, I think I.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, back now. I think I had a big, quick, short glitch there.
Okay. Yes, what I was going to say is we should really take this as more of a podcast. I think the live streaming is interesting, and I'm also curious as to whether that is something people actually want. And I'm also curious to see if people watch it or listen to it on YouTube after the fact, because as soon as we finish live streaming this will be a video that's available on YouTube. But I think we should treat it like we're recording a podcast more than a live stream.
Yeah, that's probably a good assumption.
So tell us what's been happening with the package index for the last couple of weeks, Sven.
Well, we had lots of under the hood changes that are really hard to talk about in a podcast. So, I mean, there's been activity and discussions and stuff, little issues that we fixed here and there, but I think there hasn't been anything visible, at least that I can think about. Probably what we're doing right now is the most outward facing change that we've had, changing the format of Swift package indexing. And the other thing that sort of coincides with that more or less is that we're also available on Mastodon now. So we have accounts set up there for our two Twitter accounts, which are called Swift Package Index and Swift Package Updates, and they're on the mas.to server. We'll add links to that to the show notes, so you can follow us there. And yeah, it would be interesting to see the activities over there. But I think, at least according to my notes, that's all there is since the last time.
So with the Mastodon stuff, we haven't yet started streaming the package updates to those that package updates account, have we?
Oh yes, we have. Yeah.
Oh, we have. Okay, I did.
So news for you as well, Dave.
I saw the pull request, but I wasn't sure whether it was actually live.
No, what I did, so there was two ways of doing it. One is to actually set up an app.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, actually posting to the API would have the advantage that we can use the full 500 character limit, but that's probably, it's rare that a package will have a description long enough to actually blow past the 280 characters on Twitter. What we're doing right now is we're using moa.party, which is a commonly used service to mirror Twitter and Mastodon back and forth. So people interested in doing this, or looking at Mastodon themselves, this is a service where you connect with your Twitter handle and your Mastodon handle, and then you can configure bi-directional syncing of the accounts. So you can either tweet or you can post on Mastodon, and it'll transfer those across, and you can even switch and all sorts of stuff. So that's a nice service if you have something that you're populating on one side or the other and want mirrored on the other side. And as we are currently looking at both services, that's kind of nice. With very little effort, you can get this set up. Yeah, and it looks identical pretty much, so that's nice.
The only other thing that I had to mention today was, again, behind the scenes stuff, real kind of in the weeds, but the slight issues that we're having with our build system right now. So we have been running our 5.7 Swift builds on a Ventura beta machine up until last week, and that machine had some issues. It had some stability. It actually didn't have any stability issues in day-to-day running, but every time you interacted with it, it was extremely unstable. And there was also a problem where we couldn't switch users because it would hang as you were trying to switch users. And so I put that down to it being a beta, and we decided Mac Stadium's announced support for their for the release version of Ventura, and so we asked them to put a fresh copy of the operating system on this machine, and we set it up and got it processing using the release version of Ventura. And since then, it has been extremely unstable and crashes every few hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, which is not great. So yeah, we've been trying to figure out either whether this is a package that we're trying to compile that is causing a problem with the machine, which we've definitely had situations like that before. And if it turns out not to be a package, then what I've either done while setting it up that was wrong, or what else this problem is. But there's definitely some stability issues with our build system right now, which we try we try our hardest not to have stability issues like that, but we have one right now.
Yeah, that Mac is having a hard time.
It is.
Let's hope we can figure that out.
I desperately hope we can, because at the moment we're having to reboot it every like power cycle reboot it every 4 or 5 hours, which is obviously not ideal.
Yeah.
So that's and then the remainder of my time has been sorting out this podcast, because it's taken a little bit of work to get everything up and running and figure out how we're going to do it. And we actually don't have a full podcast feed yet, but as soon as this episode is recorded, that will be my next task. So I would imagine on Monday we'll have a podcast feed with this episode in it.
Yeah, and we will make a bit of an effort to back populate the previous episodes as far as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there'll be more than one episode in there. We
shall
see.
I think it's time, quiz time.
Oh, right. See, what we lost in the transition was the soundboard, which we never used, but
Riverside, which is the service we're using, has a soundboard, and so I could pretend like there was an audience that was laughing right now at all these wonderful jokes. But probably best that we don't use that very much. All right, it's quiz time. We don't have a jingle for quiz time, but it is quiz time. So the data that this quiz is based on today is the data from a feature which we've had a couple of people work over the summer on from the Swift mentorship program, and one of those people is a guy called Javier, who I've been working with very closely. And what he's been doing, the feature is not quite live yet, but the data collection has been live for a couple of weeks now. What we've been gathering is automatically extracting author information out of Git history for each package on the package index. And so we have some interesting author data. So of all the packages in our package index, which package has the most contributors? It's hard to answer these questions, right?
Well, I can't even think of. I mean, probably a package that's been around for a long. Fastlane.
Fastlane is indeed correct. 1,440 contributors to Fastlane, which is a remarkable number. Absolutely remarkable number. Just it shows what an amazing project that has been for so many years of the kind of Objective-C and Swift ecosystem. It's an amazing project, and 1,440 contributors. Any guesses on the second?
Wow. No, well, I mean, I'm going to just say Alarm.fire. That's another long-running package I can think of. But I think what I'd be interested in the gap between the first and the second, because I think Fastlane is probably quite unique in the number of contributors because of the structure. I think it's it's probably more approachable to extend by its nature. I'm not sure if all the modules that it has
Mhm.
count fall under the umbrella project, but that might be part of it. And I remember seeing it show up in other queries that I've run, like
Oh,
releases. I
interesting.
think it
Yeah.
also had a number of lead maintainers that probably brought different sets of people with them or stuff like that. It's probably are all things that make that package quite unique
Yeah.
in its
So Alamo
authorship.
Fire is not number 2. It is in the top 10, but it's at number 9. Um,
Oh,
but you're right that Fastlane is leagues ahead of second place. So 1,440 for Fastlane, and the number 2 spot is 611. So less than half
wow.
as many contributors. I was quite surprised that what was in the number 2 spot. It was Flat Buffers by Google.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, what an enormous number of contributors for that project. In
Yeah.
place 3 with 398 was RX Swift. And
Mhm.
then a couple of ones that you definitely would probably expect to be in there. 383 people have contributed to the Swift Package Manager, um, and
Right. Yeah. Okay.
364 to Swift Lint. Um, but then you've got a lot of, the rest of the top 10 is things like SD Web Image, which is, again, a package that's been around for a long time, Reactive Swift, Moya, Alamo Fire. One that I didn't expect in the top 10 was the Facebook SDK with
Oh,
244
okay.
contributors. So
I mean, just I wonder how much of that is with Google and Facebook is just pure employee attrition.
it could be, right? Yeah. It could be, yeah. And Vapor just didn't make it into the top 10, but it's at spot number 11.
Right. Nice.
So if we get 2 more contributors to Vapor, then it'll knock Facebook off the top 10.
Oh, why go?
There's also a couple of others in the top, 50 or something like that were interesting. Sparkle has 212. Lottie from Airbnb has 201 contributors. Lots of packages with 200 contributors is an enormous number.
Yeah,
uh,
that's
of,
amazing.
of people working on a project. Yeah. So next question: how many
Right.
packages have only one contributor, one person in their Git history?
Ooh, like percentage wise.
As in, there is only one Git committer.
No, I mean as in percent of overall packages.
We could do
Of
it as a percent. I can work a percent out.
probably more than 50%, I think. I would say that's probably going to drop off fast, the number. I'm going to say 60%.
I am just calculating the percentage because I didn't quite know how many packages we had.
That should be
30,
3,000.
33% of packages
Oh, wow.
have
Okay.
only one contributor. Yeah. Now
Okay.
there is there is a little caveat here, which is it's very easy when you
Oh,
start a
right.
new
Yeah.
project to accidentally get 2 contributors,
Yeah, you have
because if
you
you
have
haven't
different email addresses in your Git
exactly,
setup. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
so it is quite
Interesting.
easy. Yeah, it's quite easy for that to happen. So I think there's probably an element of that happening here. um,
So
um,
one or
yeah,
two, how many is that? What percentage is
well,
that
I
up
do
to?
have the percentage of 3 or less.
Yeah.
Any guesses?
Well, I'm gonna say 60% there then.
So there you go. That's you're there with it there. 66% of
Well,
packages in the
I'm going to
index.
claim that point. Thank
You're
you.
going to claim that as a victory. Yes, yes, you can. um, and and then there are 58 packages with more than 100 contributors, which it's just I think that I was quite surprised how high that was.
That is amazing. Yeah, that's. I mean, stuff like VS Code. You can see how that happens, especially if it's front end heavy and But you know, a library like Flatbuffers, the Google thing is like that's a pure. It sounds
Yep.
like I'm not sure what Flatbuffers is, but I imagine it's something like a protocol buffers. A is that like a codable kind of thing? Um,
I'm
it
not 100%
sounds
sure, but
sounds quite low level, so I don't think you know you just drive by and make a contribution to that,
yes,
as you
yeah,
would perhaps in tweaking a color on something. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you know,
Um,
interesting.
so that's the quiz, the return of the quiz. I can't promise that there'll be another quiz next week because we had called an end to that. But I thought, given that we had this author data, I thought it was worth just asking you a couple of questions there on on the subject of that author feature. The reason we're holding it back from the live site for now is partly because even though the feature itself is completed, and in fact, if you look on the staging site, so we have a staging site at staging.swiftpackageindex.com, you'll be able to see author information coming from that feature on that site. But the reason we're not pushing it live yet is because it is based on Git history, and Git history is not necessarily always the most accurate. Like it's accurate technically, but it sometimes does not represent who actually wrote a package. um, we are putting a override in so that package authors will be able to specify via the package manifest a string of text that should replace whatever Git says, basically. So we're going to have it completely up to the package author. If they would like to describe it in the opposite way that Git history describes it, that's fine by us. We want to give the flexibility to the package author because that's ultimately who wrote the package and who gets to make that decision. But also, it can be used to correct little things like, for example, some packages have a lot of commits by CI bots in them, and almost
Mm.
certainly the package authors would want to remove those CI bots. And maybe a package was created by somebody 10 years ago that had a lot of commits, but then for the last 8 years, somebody else has been maintaining it. And the raw number of Git commits might put those two people in an order where the current package author might be more comfortable with them flipped. And that's the kind of thing that we want to give people the flexibility to do.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a good tandem thing because you know that's the obvious follow-up
That's it.
request
And
otherwise.
and what I don't want to do is put the feature live and then immediately have people saying, "Well, I don't agree with this." Or if they do say that, I want to be able to have an answer that says, "That's no problem at all. Here's how to fix that."
Just add empty commits by the right accounts to get the
That's
results that you need.
correct. Yes. So, shall we move on to a slight update on the live streaming situation that we now have two viewers. Um, so, I don't think
Well,
you've opened up another browser window, have you, Sven?
no,
Okay, that's good.
no, no.
Um,
I held back.
so, hello to whoever you are. We do have a chat on the YouTube site. If you want to say something, I do have that chat window open, so we would see it. But no need to if you don't want to. We will carry on. And what we should do now is actually switch to our package recommendations. So I will get us started this week. And the first package that I would like to talk about today is a package called Wave by Janum Trivedi. And it's a Spring-based animation engine for iOS that makes it easy to create fluid, interruptible animations that feel great. So this, I'm broadcasting this obviously on the stream now as well. But if you're listening on the podcast, this is a animation framework that allows you to, for example, if you the example that's on the README is a box moving between two places on the screen, and the animation starts by it going from bottom right to top left, but then halfway through the animation they change the destination, and so you have this nice curve as the box that's being animated changes its destination and has a really smooth journey to its destination.
Oh, that's
It
nice.
is
That's very nice.
it is a UIKit package, and I didn't see any mention of SwiftUI, but that's not a problem because there's still a lot of people writing UIKit code. But I thought it was a nice animation. It looks to have a nice API, and I thought it was worth a mention.
Yeah, it looks great. I always love it when there's a little animated GIF or something, a video in
Yeah.
the README. I mean, if it's a package that sort of does UI based things, just to give you a feel for what you would be getting if you hook this up. Also because UI stuff can often be quite a bit harder to set up in a meaningful way, to experiment with it. Whereas a library, it's sometimes, or often a bit easier to get started and put it in a playground or something. Really
Yes.
nice.
So that's my
All right.
first recommendation for today. How about you, Sven?
Nice one. I've picked a package called Text to Emoji by Wouter Wisse. I hope I got that right. I think that's a Dutch name. And that's a little package. Yeah, you've got it right up there on the screen. So that's a little package where you can have a textual description and get the emoji out of it. So, for example, tomato as a string would be converted into a little tomato emoji.
I think before you carry on, I'd like to
One,
draw attention to the quite remarkable package description, which is, I'm not sure why you'd need this.
yes, I saw that. I actually have it in, and my answer would be, well, so we can talk about it. Yeah, I mean, I could think of a use case almost straight away. So as I transitioned over to Mastodon over the course of the week, as probably a lot of others, I looked at Mastodon clients, then I poked around a bit, wrote something, loaded in the stream, and the first thing I saw, well, people are using name like on GitHub as an emoji shortcut, which obviously isn't rendered by default if you pipe it into a text view or something. And that could be a use case where you stick that, pad it with colons and then run it through this thing, or run it through this thing, or strip out the colons and run it through the thing and see if you get a matching emoji, and then replace the whole thing by that. That's one thing I could think of where I might actually have use of that package. It does other things as well. So it's not just a textual replacement of a tomato with the emoji, because there are cases where you might have the same word appearing in multiple categories. So one example given in the README is shrimp, which might be both a food and drink emoji, sadly, or the animals and nature emoji, where the thing is still intact and alive. And there's that level of control that you have, and I can see it being useful if you have, for example, an emoji picker where you want to support categories, and people can type names and then you filter on the lists and that sort of stuff. So I think there's use for that package, especially if you want to prototype something and have a nice looking thing quickly to proof of concept a thing. And then you can still think about all the edge cases and multi-language support, although it does support Dutch and English terms already, so it is built with that in mind. So it's an interesting package, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a use case for exactly this, but we have a use case for quite a similar thing in the package index, which is we need to cope with
Right, yeah.
all of the GitHub textual abbreviations for emojis, and that is a extremely useful lookup to be able to have. But I think you're right that the best place for this package is if you're building an emoji picker into your project that is not the standard emoji picker, you're going to be able to help people out with some natural language matching on emojis, and I like that.
Yeah.
So
nice little package.
Vuta, we disagree with your package description. I'm not sure why you'd need this because we can both think of a reason. My next package recommendation is we may have even talked about it before. We've certainly talked about it a lot, but internally at the package index here because we use it extensively. Swift Argument Parser had a new release this week, and one of the release notes that was there was this feature of option groups. And so you can now put an option group in into your option definitions and have your options grouped like this. So effectively, if you say there are two option groups, one for options and one for extras, you can add different options to different groups. And when you use the argument parser help that gets built for free in your command line tool, it will categorize the options based on option group if you've specified them. And I mean, I just also want to just give argument parser a bit of love here because I absolutely love this package. I think it's woefully undernamed as argument parser. I think this is basically this is a toolkit to create a command line tool in a few lines of code. It is a trivial amount of code to get a command line tool that behaves exactly as you'd expect the command line tool to behave. So if you do -- help, you're going to get some help. It supports subcommands, it supports options, it supports long and short options. There are so many things that are quite tricky to implement if you don't have something like this, and it just makes that whole process easier.
Yep. It's a fantastic package, and not only that, it can also generate auto-completion hints for various shells. It's like amazing. I would slightly object that it's everything shell because I can think of things that are missing, better shell out support. It's a bit fiddly to do that with Foundation. Would be nice if, that's something that is probably, it's not Swift Argument Parser specific, but that's what I would throw into a bundle of things that make for a very good command line kit thing. And the other thing, I think, it's absolutely great to get started with a script or have a thing that you've written where you actually need a few things. It's very easy to then add, the switches, which is typically what makes you pause. You've written something quick and dirty, and then you need a parameter, and then grinds to a halt because you can't bring yourself to write something complicated. You just want to keep it simple, and Swift Argument Parser is really, really great because it does take very little setup to actually add parameters and stuff like that. But the other thing is there is a project underway and being talked about in the Swift. What's the working group? Is it help me out here, Dave? The
Swift server working group, or
it might be a working group. There is a project underway to make it easier to get started with scripts. Right now the problem is you can easily run a single Swift file as a script, but it's more complicated to transition over to something that will import other packages. There are some community tools around that, like Swift SH. But there's a project underway to make that an official thing that you can do to have it import packages and then use packages without having to set up a full Swift package necessarily. So that's great, and that's a bright future there for Swift scripting.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that package, that initiative in one of the work groups. So I'm guessing it might be the Swift server work group that's doing that, because I'm not a member of that work group, and I whereas I am a member of a couple of the other ones. It could also be the core language team work group. That might be the one where they're doing that work.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it was the Swift server work group. I saw it in one of their in their they post their work group meeting notes, and I saw it mentioned there.
quick update on the number of viewers. We briefly went to 3 and are now back down to 2.
Oh well.
Okay, what's your next
Right.
recommendation, Sven?
The next recommendation is Swift GUI, Swift GUI by Jonas Kolb, the author of Mint. Mint is probably the other tool that the author is known for. And Swift GUI is a nice GUI to create views, Swift data types like structs, classes, enums with associated types. And I think probably the most obvious use case is here that you are building an app and you need a debug view or something to inspect data of a complex object. You have like nested arrays and dictionaries, and you really want to see what's going on, and you can't log it because it has hundreds of entries, or just even dozens is enough to completely ruin your console. But this would allow you to, without any plugging in, it just takes the structure and brings it into a view. A bit like in Xcode, when you have a plist, it'll sort of offer UI to look at a plist in a graphical way. The arrays
plist
are
viewer,
pop-ups, this looks to be richer. It has toggles for booleans, and I can't see it on your screen, on the broadcast screen right now, but I'm pretty sure it has other data types as well. I think I see a date there that is rendered nicely. So this is a quite nice default presentation of data you might have in your app that you can inspect and present.
It even has support, by the look of it, for URLs, and if that URL points to an image, it will download a preview of the image as well.
Oh, there you go. That's great. Yeah, it looks like a really, really nice package for, I mean, even if you're building a client for a JSON endpoint, you might throw that in as a default view initially to see what's going on. And that's probably, with a bit of tweaking or no tweaking, you might have something usable for certain tools, that might not be user facing, but, development tools. I think that's a great package that'll get you a lot of the way for something, a little data viewer.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
My final recommendation for today is Diligence by, looks like it's by a company called In7 Limited. So I'm not sure who, this is where we could use our author support, right? Because I always like to shout out the actual person whose name it is that was primarily responsible. But in kind of a similar way to what you were just talking about, this is a way to build some UI based on some data that you've not necessarily designed the entire screen for. So Diligence is a SwiftUI about screen for both iOS and macOS. And it basically builds you a view controller that you can present onto the screen with, actually I shouldn't call them view controllers with SwiftUI, should I? But it's a screen of data. Yes, I lose today's banned word competition. So it will create you a screen that grabs various different bits of information from your project. So, for example, obviously version number, things like build, and then you can basically add people like acknowledgement, so you can credit various people. You can acknowledge people for different the different tasks that they did. So you can, for example, have an acknowledgement group for graphics, and an acknowledgement group for thanks, an acknowledgement group for contributors. You can add URLs if you want to link to people's websites. You can include the licenses that you've for the open source projects that you've included in your application. And you do it using a result builder type syntax. just building up hierarchical data that will go into your about screen. And it works on both iOS and macOS and generates, I think, especially on macOS, quite a pleasant about box that is going to just take care of a lot of the default stuff that you would need to put in there.
Yeah, that looks really nice. It was actually on my list as well. And also for the macOS screen.
Yeah.
I really like that, the layout of it. It's really nice.
Yeah.
By the way, quick update. I brought up the package on staging, and the main author is Jason Berry Morley.
There we go. So that feature by Javier is already proving useful.
Yes, it also lists as the second author 1, just the number 1.
And that is why we
and other contributors. So I think we have a bit of a tiny bit of work ahead of us.
That's why we need the override.
Yeah. Cool. Very nice. Very nice. Just checking. Did I have any?
You did have one more. It was a doubler.
Yeah, I was just checking if I had anything in my notes because I had diligence also as a
right.
package.
Okay.
I wondered, but you covered it all. My third pick is a pair, which really is pretty much a pair, and it's also in what they do in naming. They're called Quick and Nimble. These are popular testing frameworks. Quick is a BDD style framework, behavior-driven development, which I've personally never used. It's sort of you describe, and it actually uses the term describe to set up your fixture, and it says describe your test scenario, and then it does in assertions within it. I can't describe it well because I never really understood the concept properly. And the other one, Nimble, is a package that gives you much nicer reading and more modern and just all around nicer assertions. Instead of the XCT assert equal, you literally say assert. Oh no, I think there's also equal, just equal. It's functions effectively, functions that you call equals. It's probably worthwhile looking at the syntax in the to give a description. Let me just bring one up to describe better what you can do. Yes, you would say, for instance, expect, and then parentheses your value dot the thing to, and then dot to, and then equal. So it's hard to describe, but when you actually see it, it makes a lot of sense. It's like a written sentence of your
creates very
equality expression.
Expectations. Yeah. So if you read one of these examples out, it will say literally expect X to not equal Y. Like that's a very readable line of code.
Yeah, and it also, so you can use that dot syntax with function calls. It also has operator overloads where you can just expect you can just use equals or not equals. And actually, I just recalled I made a contribution like years and years and years ago to that, to add, like when you compare floating point, I added I'm not sure how to describe it, the equal sign, the squirrely equal sign that you use in scientific notation when you say something is almost equal or within an error margin. So you can use that to compare floats with a certain, allowance for certain accuracy. And you can even give a delta value equals and then plus minus a certain range. And you can use a little plus minus a ligature to express that. So you can actually write quite scientific looking checks there. Well, that was a bit of a tangent. I actually wanted to bring up the package because both packages had big releases. Quick 6.0.0 and Nimble 11.0.0, and the big change there, async await support, which I guess was really making it hard to use them when you had async tests, because effectively all the assertions were unusable if your values were await values. I mean, you could probably still use them if you assign them to values before the assertion, but then you're really adding a lot of boilerplate. So that's for users of those really great packages. Those are really nice additions and make them really good citizens in the async await world.
Yeah, that's great. And I had spotted these, and they were on my shortlist too. I'm a big fan of this. So back in my Ruby days, both of these packages are based on or very similar to a project called RSpec, and it's a really nice way of hierarchically defining tests. So you can kind of say, this group of code here, and they use this describe kind of construct to group sections of code and sections of tests. So you can say describe, in the example that we've got on the README here, describe a dolphin, and then inside that describe a dolphin, you've got describe click, and then you've got some tests that give some context. So it says context when it is not near anything interesting, it emits only one click. And you should go and have a look at the README because it makes more sense when you can see the code. But it's a really nice way of grouping tests together and keeping the test to be very focused to testing just one thing. And you can have lots of tests inside a context or inside a describe block. You can have before each and after each sections within each context or describe block. Creates a very flexible way of testing. The biggest issue with it is actually an Xcode issue. And so when you do use RSpec in Ruby, it works beautifully because Ruby understands RSpec and it doesn't have a very strictly defined set of what a test is. And so they can kind of hook into that whole mechanism and it can act very naturally. The problem is with Xcode testing is that you do have to ultimately have a test function. And so what you end up with is all of your descriptions and your context and all the rest of it in one test. And it does work and it's good, but it is definitely something you should be aware of going into it. And I wish there was slightly more flexible test definitions within Xcode that this could hook into.
Because if there were, you can only run the whole test and not a subsection.
No, I'm speaking without a huge amount of knowledge, and there may be that feature actually put me off from using it, and so there may be ways around this. Maybe we should have someone who is a passionate user, or maybe one of the maintainers on it, to talk about some of the issues, because I'd be interested in learning more. If it hooked into Xcode's Test Explorer better, I would be advocating that we use this in Package Index, because I love the mechanism of testing that it enables.
Right. Yeah. Following your description, it actually sort of clicked for me, because what we're doing right now, we have snake cased sectioning of our tests. We name our tests, obviously test at the start, then underscore, then because they're in a test file scoped on a certain module already, that isn't repeated there. But then within the module, we might test topic A, and then there's underscore A, and then we test aspects of A, and then we have an underscore, and then we have those aspects that we're testing. And if I follow along, the A in the snake case of our test name would be a describe section in this scheme, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, for example, one thing you might do is if you have an object and it has a method on the object, you might put the method name as a describe block. So you're describing this method, and then have contexts to set up preconditions, and then tests to actually test. So you could say, my object A for method B in the context of C should act like this, and it creates very readable tests that have a lot of metadata around context and the setup that needs to that is assumed within that test.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Cool. Yes,
there we
so
go.
there you go.
So
quick and nimble async awaits.
And that, I think, is the end of our package recommendations and the end of this episode 14 and the first of the podcast episodes that we also streamed to YouTube. Now, I do have some to wrap up the ongoing saga. We reached a maximum concurrent viewer count of 5, which I think is actually quite respectable. And we had 12 people tune in live overall, which is not quite as many as we had on Twitter, but let's give it some time to bring those numbers back. Thank you so much for listening. If you did tune in,
just before we,
finished.
I just saw there was a question. Pixel Science asked, "How does this work with UI tests?"
That's a great question.
I
that I don't know the answer
to. I wonder why wouldn't it, right? Because they are just tests that you instrument in a slightly different way, but the harness around it is XCT test, and I would expect Quick and Nimble to be able to drive that the same way. Your the test content inside the described blocks would be then whatever you cut out of a UI test. But I would say it should work.
I
we do
agree,
a follow-up,
but I can't guarantee it. Yes. So thank you to those people who did tune in live, and please send us feedback. Probably the easiest way to send us feedback is either via Twitter or via Mastodon. So we are Swift Packages on Twitter, and we are Swift Package Index on Mastodon, and we do check those mentions. So if you have any feedback about any of this, the live streaming, the podcast, whatever it is, or indeed just the package index itself, that's probably the best place to contact us. We also do have a Discord, and if you go to the Swift Package Index GitHub page and search for the word Discord, you'll find a link to our Discord server. So that's another place that you can get in contact with us if you have any. The Discord tends to be more around contributing and discussing features and enhancements to the package index, but we're happy to hear from anyone. If you are listening to the show, we'd be happy to hear from you. So let's leave it there for today, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks' time on the next Thursday.
And please like and subscribe.
What terrible YouTubers we are. Of course, you should smash the like button. And
Dave, it's a 2-for-1. We are now both podcasters and YouTubers with one fell swoop.
Do I have to buy a very expensive microphone?
My mum will be so proud.
All right, I will speak to you soon, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.